January 17, 1945. The frozen air above Bavaria cut like broken glass against exposed skin. In a hangar near Munich-Riem airfield, a small group of Luftwaffe test pilots gathered around an aircraft that should not have existed in their world, a pristine North American P-51D Mustang, its aluminum skin gleaming under harsh electric lights. The white star of the United States Army Air Force is still visible beneath a hasty coat of German crosses. The machine sat silent, foreign, impossibly sleek. Outside, the wind carried the distant thunder of Allied bombers, reducing German cities to ash and memory. Inside, Hauptmann Wolfgang Fischer ran his gloved hand along the Mustang's wing, feeling the flush rivets, the precision of its construction, the smooth perfection of American industrial power made manifest in metal and purpose. The temperature in the hangar hovered near freezing, yet sweat gathered at Fischer's temples. He had flown Messerschmitts through the crucible of the Eastern Front, had survived 3 years of aerial combat that consumed pilots like kindling in a furnace. But standing before this captured enemy fighter, he felt something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling, the cold recognition of technological obsolescence. The Mustang represented more than enemy machinery. It embodied a philosophy of warfare his nation had catastrophically underestimated, the marriage of overwhelming industrial capacity with tactical brilliance, of strategic patience with mechanical excellence. This single aircraft, one of dozens that had been captured throughout the war, told a story that German propaganda could not suppress, that America possessed resources so vast, manufacturing capabilities so profound, that they could afford to build fighters like this one by the thousands, while Germany scraped together aluminum from melted cookware and church bells. The historical significance of captured P-51 Mustangs in German hands extended far beyond simple technical curiosity. These aircraft became unwitting ambassadors of American power, flying laboratories that forced Luftwaffe engineers and pilots to confront the widening chasm between German aeronautical ambitions and Allied reality. Throughout 1944 and 1945, the Reichsluftfahrtdienst, the Reich Aviation Ministry, reported a clandestine program evaluating captured Allied aircraft at facilities scattered across diminishing German territory. The program, officially designated as Circus Rosarius, after circus impresario Hans-Joachim Rosarius, who commanded it, represented Germany's desperate attempt to understand why their pilots were dying in unprecedented numbers over their own homeland. The capture and context P-51D that Fischer would fly that January morning had been captured under circumstances that epitomized both American abundance and German desperation. In September 1944, during a low-altitude strafing run near Aachen, Second Lieutenant Robert Mitchell of the 357th Fighter Group had experienced catastrophic engine failure after ground fire severed his coolant line. The Packard-built Merlin engine, that magnificent fusion of British design and American manufacturing, had seized within minutes. Mitchell, demonstrating the training and composure that characterized American pilots, had glided the crippled fighter toward Allied lines, but altitude and geography conspired against him. He brought the Mustang down in a controlled belly landing in a harvested wheat field 3 kilometers inside German territory, the aircraft sliding to rest with minimal damage beyond bent propeller blades and scrapes along its ventral surfaces. German troops reached the crash site before Mitchell could destroy his aircraft or escape. They found him attempting to set fire to the cockpit with matches from his survival kit, a futile gesture against the Mustang's all-metal construction. The fighter was captured intact, complete with its K-14 guns, its 6 Browning machine guns, full ammunition load, and crucially, its laminar flow wing design and aerodynamic refinements that represented years of American research and development. Within hours, the Mustang had been loaded onto a flatbed truck and transported to the Luftwaffe's primary testing facility in Mecklenburg, where engineers descended upon it with measuring instruments, cameras, and barely concealed amazement at what those engineers discovered during their initial examination challenged fundamental assumptions about aircraft design that German aeronautical philosophy had held sacred since the days of the Fokker. The Mustang's construction revealed an approach to fighter design that prioritized strategic range and high-altitude performance over the quick-turning, lightweight philosophy that dominated Luftwaffe thinking, where German fighters sacrificed range for maneuverability, accepting fuel capacities that limited operational radius to a few hundred kilometers. The P-51D carried 269 gallons of internal fuel, and could be fitted with external drop tanks that extended its combat radius to over 1,000 miles. This single characteristic, the ability to escort bombers deep into the Reich and still engage in combat, had transformed the strategic bombing campaign from a costly war of attrition into an engine of German industrial destruction. Mustang's construction quality spoke to manufacturing capabilities that existed in a different universe from the improvised, shortage-plagued German aircraft industry of 1944. Every rivet sat flush, every seam aligned with micrometer precision. The aircraft's skin, formed from high-grade aluminum alloy, showed no signs of the material inconsistencies and substitutions that plagued late-war German production. The paint, even the enemy markings, displayed a quality of finish that German factories could no longer achieve with their dwindling supplies of proper coatings and primers. One Rechlin engineer, Oberleutnant Karl Bohr, wrote in his technical assessment, "The manufacturing precision of this aircraft suggests production methods and quality control standards we cannot currently match. Every component speaks to unlimited resources and systematic industrial processes operating without disruption. This is not merely a superior fighter, it is proof of industrial capacity we cannot hope to equal." Expectations versus reality. German pilots selected to fly captured Mustangs approached their assignments with expectations shaped by years of Nazi propaganda and genuine combat experience against American fighters. They anticipated flying an enemy machine they understood to be capable but ultimately conquerably a product of American material wealth but lacking the tactical sophistication and fighting spirit of German aviation. The propaganda ministry had spent years crafting narratives of American industrial might, producing quantity over quality, of pilots more concerned with comfort than combat prowess, of an air force that relied on overwhelming numbers rather than superior skill. These narratives, reinforced by Joseph Goebbels' constant messaging about American weakness and decadence, had created a psychological framework that even experienced Luftwaffe pilots unconsciously accepted. Fischer himself, standing before the Mustang that frozen January morning, carried these assumptions into the cockpit. He expected to find an aircraft with excellent performance but inferior handling characteristics, something fast in straight flight, but sluggish in the dogfight turns, where German pilots believed battles were won. He anticipated heavy controls, sluggish response, perhaps the kind of mushy handling that characterized bombers more than fighters. He had been briefed on the Mustang's impressive range and its powerful armament, but he expected these advantages to come at the cost of agility and responsiveness. In his mind, the P-51 represented American philosophy, big, powerful, brutish, but ultimately lacking the refined touch of German engineering tradition. The moment Fischer advanced the throttle and felt the Packard Merlin's 1,490 horsepower surge through the airframe, every assumption shattered like ice under a hammer. The Mustang leaped forward with an acceleration that pressed him into his seat, the tail lifting almost immediately, the aircraft demanding flight rather than grudgingly accepting it. Within seconds, the fighter was airborne, climbing at an angle that would have stalled a Messerschmitt Bf 109G. Yet the Mustang's controls remained crisp, responsive, alive in his hands. The fighter climbed through 2,000 meters in less than 4 minutes, still accelerating, still responsive, the Merlin singing its distinctive note part roar, part whistle that had become the sound of doom to German pilots across every front dot at altitude. Fischer began the evaluation sequence, starting with basic maneuvers, gentle turns, speed changes, climbs and descents, feeling for the aircraft's personality, its quirks and demands. What he discovered transformed his understanding of enemy capability. The Mustang responded to control inputs with immediate precision. The ailerons, those crucial surfaces governing roll rate, moved with a lightness and effectiveness that surpassed his Messerschmitt experience. In a rolling turn, the P-51 transitioned from one bank to another with startling rapidity, the aircraft seeming to anticipate his intentions. The rudder required careful coordination. The Mustang's long fuselage and powerful engine created torque effects that demanded attention, but once mastered, the aircraft could be positioned with sniper-like precision. Then came the speed runs. Fischer pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power and pointed the Mustang's nose downward in a shallow dive. The airspeed indicator climbed 300 miles per hour, 350, 400, at speeds where German fighters developed control, flutter, and structural concerns. the Mustang remained solid, stable, controllable. Fisher eased the stick back, pulling into a climbing turn, the aircraft loading multiple Gs onto its structure and his body. The wings flexed but held. The controls remained effective. The Merlin's supercharger, designed to maintain power at extreme altitudes, kept feeding the engine even as Fisher climbed past 6,000 meters. At this height, where Luftwaffe fighters gasped for air and lost performance, the Mustang flew as though at sea level, perhaps better, its laminar flow wings achieving their designed efficiency in the thin, cold atmosphere. The combat evaluation came next: simulated attacks, defensive maneuvers, the split-second decisions that defined aerial warfare. Fisher rolled the Mustang into an attack dive against an imaginary bomber formation, accelerating to attack speed, then braking hard to evade simulated defending fighters. The aircraft responded instantly, the high-speed handling remaining predictable and controllable. He attempted the defensive brake turn that had saved his life twice over Russia, expecting the heavy American fighter to wallow or lose energy in the hard turn. Instead, the Mustang carved through the maneuver, bleeding speed but maintaining control, authority. The pilot able to continue fighting rather than becoming a passenger in his own aircraft. In the post-war testimony of German test pilot Hans-Werner Lurch, who flew dozens of captured Allied aircraft, his assessment of the P-51 was unambiguous. The Mustang was simply the best fighter aircraft of the war. Superior speed, superior range, good handling at all speeds, and nearly impossible to catch once it decided to disengage. Flying it, one understood why we were losing the air war. The technical reality, the technical superiority of the P-51 Mustang rested on foundational engineering decisions made years before the aircraft entered combat, decisions that reflected American industrial philosophy and research capabilities operating on scales Germany could not match. The Mustang's genesis lay in a 1940 British Purchasing Commission request for North American aviation to build Curtiss P-40 fighters under license. James Dutch Kindleberger, North American's president, made an audacious counteroffer. His company could design and build a superior fighter in the same time frame. The British, desperate for aircraft as the Battle of Britain raged, agreed. Within 117 days, North American delivered the first prototype. This compressed development timeline was possible only because of extensive wind tunnel research. Existing data from NAC, 8th National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics and Manufacturing Capabilities, that could rapidly translate designs into flying hardware. Mustang's revolutionary laminar flow wing design, developed by an ACA engineer Eastman Jacobs, represented years of aerodynamic research conducted in American wind tunnels. The wing's carefully shaped airfoil maintained smooth airflow over a larger percentage of the chord than conventional designs, dramatically reducing drag at high speeds. This single feature gave the Mustang a cruise efficiency that no German fighter could approach, while Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs burned through their limited fuel capacities battling drag and turbulence. The Mustang slipped through the air with remarkable efficiency, extending its range and reducing fuel consumption to levels that enabled strategic escort missions German planners considered theoretically impossible. The marriage of the Mustang airframe with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, built under license by Packard in America, created synergies that transcended either component alone. The Merlin, with its two-stage two-speed supercharger, maintained sea-level power up to 30,000 feet and beyond, at altitudes where German fighters struggled to maintain combat effectiveness. The Mustang actually improved its performance, the thin air reducing drag, while the supercharged Merlin maintained thrust. This high-altitude capability proved decisive in 1944, when American bomber formations began operating at altitudes specifically chosen to exploit Luftwaffe performance limitations. German pilots found themselves fighting at heights where their aircraft handled sluggishly, bled energy rapidly in turns, and could not sustain climbs, while escorting Mustangs operated in their element, dominating the vertical and horizontal planes. Simultaneously, the Mustang's combat radius, that crucial military metric measuring how far an aircraft can fly, fight, and return, exceeded 1,000 miles with external drop tanks. This capability redefined strategic bombing doctrine. Before the Mustang entered service in large numbers, in early 1944, American heavy bombers flew and escorted deep into Germany, suffering catastrophic losses to Luftwaffe interceptors. The introduction of long-range Mustang escorts transformed this equation. Suddenly, no target in Germany lay beyond reach of fighters that could protect the bombers throughout their entire mission. Engaging German interceptors over their own airfields, pursuing them through their landing patterns, destroying them on the ground. The Luftwaffe, which had survived by withdrawing its fighters to safety when fuel ran low, found itself hunted relentlessly by aircraft that could follow them home and still have fuel for the return journey. German engineers, examining captured Mustangs, documented these capabilities with growing alarm. The technical reports from Rechlin and other evaluation centers painted a picture of systematic American advantage across every performance parameter that mattered in modern aerial warfare. A February 1945 report noted, "The enemy P-51D demonstrates performance characteristics we cannot match with current production aircraft. Maximum speed exceeds 440 miles per hour at altitude. Service ceiling exceeds 41,000 feet. Combat radius with drop tanks approaches 1,800 kilometers. Rate of climb and acceleration surpass the Bf-109G by significant margins. Structural strength allows extreme tactical maneuvers without failure." The conclusion is unavoidable. We face technical and industrial disadvantages that cannot be overcome through pilot skill or tactical innovation alone. Symbolism of abundance. One element symbolized the chasm between American and German war-making capacity. It was not the Mustang's elegant lines or powerful engine, it was the small, seemingly insignificant details that German pilots and ground crews noticed when examining captured aircraft. Inside the cockpit, Fisher found a cushioned seat with adjustable positioning. The instruments, arranged with ergonomic logic, featured clear markings and reliable precision. The control stick, wrapped in comfortable grip material, fell naturally to hand. The canopy, blown from a single piece of curved plexiglass, provided visibility in nearly all directions, a stark contrast to the heavily multi-piece canopies of German fighters that created blind spots and limited situational awareness. These small comforts, individually minor, collectively revealed an approach to military production that valued the pilot's effectiveness and survival as much as the aircraft's raw performance. The Mustang carried an emergency rations kit that became legendary among German pilots who examined captured examples, where Luftwaffe emergency supplies consisted of basic compressed rations and minimal survival equipment. The American kit included chocolate bars, chewing gum, water purification tablets, cigarettes, fishing line, hooks, matches in waterproof containers, first aid supplies, morphine syrettes for pain management, and detailed silk maps printed with evasion routes and basic foreign language phrases. The chocolate alone-rich sweet, made with real sugar, represented abundance that late-war Germany could not imagine. German pilots flew with ersatz rations made from sawdust and chemical substitutes, their chocolate replaced by carob, their coffee by roasted acorns, while their American counterparts enjoyed the genuine article as emergency supplies. That this abundance extended to ammunition loads and weapon systems. The P-51D carried 6 Browning M2.50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing, with 1,880 rounds total and ammunition capacity that allowed extended combat without the desperate conservation German pilots faced with their limited cannon ammunition. The .50 caliber round itself represented American manufacturing philosophy, powerful enough to destroy enemy aircraft, reliable in extreme conditions, mass-produced with such consistency that ammunition from any factory worked flawlessly in any weapon. German cannon, more powerful per shot, but requiring more complex ammunition and suffering reliability issues with their intricate mechanisms, exemplified a different approach, seek quality through sophistication rather than through reliable mass production. The recurring symbol that haunted German pilots who flew captured Mustangs was the aircraft's paint itself, not the color or markings, but the quality and uniformity of the finish. Even on fighters that had seen combat, flown dozens of missions, absorbed the stress of high-G maneuvers and extreme altitude, the paint remained intact, smooth, professional. German fighters of 1944 to 1945 often flew with mottled camouflage applied by hand, with bare metal showing through worn areas, with patches of different colored paint indicating field repairs. The Americans, facing no material shortages, no bombing of their factories, no disruption of their supply chains, could afford to perfectly paint every aircraft applying corrosion-resistant primers and durable finishes that protected the airframe and maintained the precise surface smoothness crucial to performance. This paint, something as mundane as surface coating, became a symbol of industrial might that could afford perfection in details that desperate nations abandoned. The impossible to bring down revelation, phrase that emerged from German test pilots who flew captured Mustangs. Impossible to bring down reflected not hyperbole but tactical reality. The designation came from combat analysis of engagement outcomes between Mustangs and Luftwaffe fighters throughout 1944. The statistics were devastating. In air-to-air combat, P-51 Mustangs achieved kill ratios approaching 5-to-1 against German fighters, meaning for every Mustang lost in air combat, 5 German fighters were destroyed. These numbers, meticulously recorded by both sides, told a story of systematic domination that transcended pilot skill or tactical doctrine. The Mustang's survivability rested on multiple reinforcing factors. Its speed advantage, crucial 30 to 50 miles per hour faster than late war Messerschmitt and Focke-Wulf variants at altitude meant American pilots controlled engagement terms. They could attack or decline combat based on tactical advantage. If wounded or low on fuel, they could simply accelerate away, climbing into the thin air where their supercharged engines maintained power while German fighters gasped and fell behind. This ability to disengage at will, something Luftwaffe pilots called the running away, proved psychologically devastating. German pilots found themselves unable to press attacks against enemies who could simply refuse to fight when conditions turned unfavorable. The aircraft's structural strength provided a safety margin that saved countless American pilots. The Mustang's airframe could sustain battle damage that would destroy lighter German fighters. Its liquid-cooled engine, while theoretically vulnerable to coolant loss, incorporated redundant systems and self-sealing mechanisms. The fuel tanks, protected by self-sealing rubber layers and carbon dioxide inerting systems, rarely exploded when struck. German pilots, flying aircraft designed for weight savings with minimal protection, faced the opposite reality. A single 20mm cannon strike could ignite their fuel tanks. Their unprotected engines could seize from minor damage. Their lightweight structures could fail under combat stress. The P-51's robust construction, born from American manufacturing capabilities that could afford the extra weight and complexity of protective systems, transformed the aircraft into a fighter that absorbed punishment and returned pilots safely to base. Fischer, completing his evaluation flight of the captured Mustang, attempted one final tester-simulated combat engagement against 2 Focke-Wulf FW-190s flown by fellow test pilots. The exercise, carefully controlled and monitored from the ground, provided direct comparison between Allied and German fighter performance. Within minutes, the engagement's outcome became clear. The Mustang could match the Focke-Wulf's turn performance, could exceed its speed at all altitudes, could outclimb it above 6,000 meters, and could sustain high-speed maneuvers longer before fuel concerns forced disengagement. When Fischer broke off the simulated combat and accelerated away in a climbing turn, the Focke-Wulfs could not follow, their pilots watching helplessly as the American fighter pulled away effortlessly. The post-flight debriefing carried the quiet, grim tone of soldiers who had just witnessed their own obsolescence. The captured Mustang's most devastating capability emerged not in mock combat but in operational planning discussions. Luftwaffe tactical officers, studying the aircraft's specifications and performance, realized that current German fighter tactics refined through years of combat experience were fundamentally undermined by the Mustang's capabilities. The standard German approach of using speed and altitude advantage to dive through bomber formations, make a single firing pass, and escape before escorts reacted, failed against fighters that could match the dive, sustain pursuit, and maintain combat effectiveness at any altitude. The alternative tactic of attacking from below, climbing to firing position, could not succeed against escorts that held altitude advantage and could dive with superior acceleration. Every tactical approach, every carefully developed doctrine, collapsed against an opponent with performance superiority across all parameters. The transformation of understanding that the experience of flying captured Mustangs transformed how surviving Luftwaffe pilots understood the air war they had lost. Before encountering the P-51 firsthand, German pilots could attribute their losses to numbers. the overwhelming quantities of Allied aircraft that filled the sky like migrating birds, the propaganda narrative of Teutonic quality versus Allied quantity provided psychological comfort, a framework for understanding defeat that preserved pride and ideology. Flying the Mustang destroyed this comforting fiction. The aircraft in their hands represented both quality and quantity, sophistication and mass production, elegant design and overwhelming numbers. America had achieved what Nazi ideology claimed was impossible. A nation devoted to comfort and democracy had produced weapons superior in every measure to those created by militaristic discipline and racial superiority. This transformation extended beyond tactical understanding into philosophical territory. The Nazi worldview, which claimed that harsh discipline, racial purity, and ideological fervor would triumph over the soft, materialistic democracies, confronted empirical refutation in the form of the P-51 Mustang. Here was a machine designed by profit-seeking capitalists, built by factory workers earning wages rather than serving a cause, flown by pilots trained in months rather than years, yet it dominated the skies over Germany with absolute authority. Every flight in a captured Mustang provided evidence against the ideological foundations of the regime German pilots had served. The cognitive dissonance this created between what they had been told to believe and what they experienced directly the psychological collapse already underway as Allied armies closed on Berlin from east and west. German engineers, examining the Mustang's construction and systems, underwent their own transformation. The aircraft represented an approach to design that contradicted German engineering philosophy, where German designers sought perfection through complexities, systems that provided marginal performance advantages when functioning perfectly but became maintenance nightmares in field conditions. American designers pursued excellence through reliability and producibility. The Mustang's systems were accessible, repairable, designed for maintenance by mechanics of average skill, using common tools. The engine, while powerful and sophisticated, could be removed and replaced in hours. The weapons, while numerous and heavily armed, functioned reliably under conditions that jammed more sophisticated German cannon. This design philosophy, prioritizing operational availability and ease of maintenance over ultimate performance, reflected a military organization that understood modern warfare's industrial and logistical dimensions in ways German planners had catastrophically underestimated. Hauptmann Werner, a Luftwaffe test pilot who flew extensively in captured Allied aircraft at Reck, wrote in his personal diary in March 1945, "We approached this war believing our technical superiority and fighting spirit would overcome any material disadvantage. Flying the American Mustang, one realizes we miscalculated fundamentally. This aircraft is not a product of lucky circumstances or captured German technology. It represents systematic development, unlimited research, resources, and manufacturing capabilities operating on scales we never possessed. The Americans could afford to test dozens of wing designs in wind tunnels. While we could barely repair the wind tunnels British bombers damaged, they could refine their engines through thousands of hours of testing while we rushed prototypes to production to replace losses. The Mustang is not merely a better fighter, it is proof that democratic capitalism, when mobilized for war, can outproduce and out-engineer totalitarian militarism. This lesson comes too late to save the Reich, but it is the most important lesson of this war. Evidence and documentation, the historical record of captured Mustangs in German service comes from multiple sources that converge on consistent conclusions. The Recklinler's testing facility maintained detailed technical reports on every captured Allied aircraft evaluated, documents that survived the war's end, and provided post-war historians with precise performance data. These reports, dry and technical in their original German, contain revelations that must have devastated those who wrote them. A November 1944 report on the P-51D concluded, Vergeltreis ist die amerikanische P-51D, allen unseren Gegenwärtigen Jagdflugzeugen oberlegen. Comparatively, the American P-51D is superior to all our current fighter aircraft. American records corroborate the Mustang's dominance from the opposite perspective. The 8th Air Force. Historical reports documented the transformation of bomber losses following the introduction of long-range Mustang escorts. In late 1943, before Mustangs arrived in numbers, bomber losses averaged 5 to 6%, per mission, an unsustainable attrition rate that would have destroyed the bomber force within months. By summer 1944, with Mustang groups providing continuous escort, bomber losses dropped to 1 to 2% per mission, despite deeper penetration into German airspace and increased frequency of operations. This dramatic reduction in losses directly correlated with Mustang introduction and escort tactics. The tactical reports from American fighter pilots who engaged German aircraft contain hundreds of combat accounts that illustrate the Mustang's advantages in practical application. Major George Preddy, the highest-scoring P-51 pilot with 26.83 victories, described his aircraft with simple clarity. The Mustang could do anything I asked it to do. When a German fighter tried to run, I could catch him. When he tried to climb away, I could follow. When he tried to turn fight, I could stay with him long enough to get a shot. The only way a German pilot could survive an engagement with a Mustang was if the Mustang pilot made a mistake or ran out of ammunition. German pilot accounts, collected through post-war interviews and published memoirs, provide the enemy perspective that validates American claims. Johann Steinhoff, a Luftwaffe fighter ace who survived the war with 176 victories, wrote in his memoir The Straits of Messina, "By 1944, American Mustangs dominated our skies absolutely. We could occasionally shoot one down, usually through surprise or numerical advantage. But in any fair fight, the Mustang won. Its pilots could choose when to engage and when to leave. We could not." This reversal of tactical initiative, more than any other factor, destroyed the Luftwaffe as an effective fighting force. We became prey in our own airspace. Statistical analysis of aerial combat results from January through May 1945, the final months of the European air war, reveals the Mustang's ultimate vindication. In this period, P-51 units claimed 4,950 aerial victories against all German aircraft types, while losing approximately 550 aircraft to all causes, including ground fire, mechanical failure, and air combat, even accounting for overclaiming, a common phenomenon in aerial warfare where multiple pilots claim the same kill. The exchange ratio remained heavily in American favor. More significantly, during these months, the Luftwaffe lost irreplaceable experienced pilots at rates that exceeded training pipeline capacity by orders of magnitude. The Mustang had become not just a superior fighter, but an extinction engine, systematically removing German pilots faster than they could be replaced. The broader strategic context, the P-51 Mustang's impact extended far beyond individual combat engagements into strategic territory that shaped the war's outcome. The aircraft enabled the combined bomber offensive to achieve its intended purpose: the systematic destruction of German industrial capacity and war-making potential. Before long-range fighter escorts became available, strategic bombing theory confronted harsh reality. Unescorted bombers, despite heavy defensive armament and tight formations, suffered unsustainable losses to German interceptors. The 8th Air Force's mission to Schweinfurt in October 1943, targeting ball-bearing production facilities, exemplified the crisis. Of 291 bombers dispatched, 60 were shot down and 17 so heavily damaged they never flew again, a 26% loss rate that would destroy any military force if sustained. After this disaster, American commanders nearly abandoned daylight strategic bombing entirely. The Mustang's arrival in early 1944, deployed in numbers sufficient to escort bomber streams throughout their entire mission profiles, resurrected the strategic bombing campaign. Suddenly, Luftwaffe interceptors faced a devastating dilemma: ignore the bombers and avoid the escorts, allowing thousands of tons of bombs to destroy German industry unhindered, or engage the bombers and face Mustang escorts in combat that German fighters increasingly lost. The Luftwaffe chose to fight, and the decision bled the organization wide. In February and March 1944, period called Big Week by Allied planners, American bombers and fighters flew continuous maximum effort missions against German aviation industry targets. The Luftwaffe rose to defend its own production facilities and was systematically destroyed in the attempt. American forces claimed over 600 German aircraft destroyed in combat during Big Week, losses the Luftwaffe could never replace. The Mustang's secondary mission: ground attack against targets of opportunity, including locomotives, vehicles, airfields, and infrastructure, accelerated German logistics collapse. P-51 pilots, having escorted bombers to targets deep in Germany and still possessing fuel for the return journey, would descend to treetop level, and attack any military target encountered. German railroad networks, already stressed by Allied bombing, faced additional pressure from marauding fighters that shot up locomotives, strafed trains, destroyed signals and switching equipment. Luftwaffe airfields, once safe from fighter attack due to distance from Allied bases, found themselves under constant assault from Mustangs that could reach any location in Germany and still return home. Parked aircraft, fuel trucks, ammunition dumps, maintenance facilities all became targets for pilots who controlled German airspace with impunity. This strategic impact rippled through every aspect of German military effectiveness. Troops at the front received fewer supplies because trains couldn't run safely during daylight. Luftwaffe units couldn't maintain operational readiness because replacement aircraft couldn't be delivered and damaged aircraft couldn't be repaired without spare parts. The Wehrmacht's vaunted mobility, dependent on motorized transport, degraded as vehicles were destroyed faster than industry could replace them, and fuel couldn't reach frontline units. Germany's military power, so overwhelming in 1939 to 1941, withered under systematic aerial assault that the Mustang made possible and sustained. The psychological impact on German civilian population and military morale completed the strategic picture. Throughout 1944 and 1945, German civilians watched American fighters roam their skies at will, attacking whatever they chose, departing when they wished. Immune to German countermeasures, the Luftwaffe, which had bombed London and Warsaw and Rotterdam, which had embodied German air power and technological prowess, had become irrelevant in its own airspace. This visible demonstration of Allied superiority, played out daily in the skies above German cities and countryside, undermined propaganda claims of impending victory or wonder weapons that would reverse the tide. The Mustangs, silver wings, glinting in the sun as formations flew toward their targets, became a symbol of inevitable German defeat, more powerful than any propaganda broadcast. Fischer's final assessment, than that January evening in 1945, after completing his evaluation of the captured Mustang. Hauptmann Wolfgang Fischer sat in the Rechlin operations room composing his official report. The room, heated inadequately against the bitter cold, seemed to embody Germany's declining fortunes, the paint peeling, the furniture worn, the single electric bulb providing dim illumination that cast deep shadows. Fischer wrote slowly, choosing his words carefully, aware that his assessment would circulate through what remained of Luftwaffe command structure. His conclusions, supported by precise performance data and combat simulation results, offered no comfort. The American P-51D Mustang represents combat capabilities our current fighter force cannot match, Fischer wrote. Superior speed at all altitudes, superior climb performance above 6,000 meters, adequate maneuverability, robust construction, reliable systems, and combat radius that enables escort throughout any mission profile into German airspace. The aircraft's only weakness appears to be torque-induced handling characteristics during takeoff and landing, a minor limitation easily mastered by trained pilots. In combat evaluation against RFW 190 and BF 109 types, the P-51D demonstrates comprehensive advantages that competent pilots will exploit to devastating effect. Recommendation: defensive tactics should emphasize numerical concentration and altitude advantage, as these provide the only scenarios where our fighters retain tactical viability against this opponent. The report's final paragraph added, after Fischer paused and stared at the dark window for several minutes, departed from technical assessment into broader observation. This aircraft and the thousands like it demonstrate industrial and technological capabilities we cannot overcome through tactical innovation or pilot courage. The enemy possesses resources and manufacturing capacity operating on scales that make our continued resistance mathematically impossible. This assessment pertains only to enemy aircraft performance and should not influence command decisions regarding overall war strategy. The final sentence, a careful disclaimer, fooled no one. Fischer was stating what every rational observer understood: Germany had lost the air war completely, and the Mustang proved it beyond argument. Fischer's report joined dozens of similar assessments from other test pilots and evaluation centers, all reaching identical conclusions, all documenting German technical inferiority with data that contradicted propaganda claims of imminent victory. These reports circulated through Luftwaffe headquarters, were summarized for higher command, and presumably reached Hermann Göring, the Reichsmarschall whose promises of air superiority had become cruel jokes. No evidence suggests these technical truths influenced German strategy or hastened surrender. The Nazi regime, divorced from reality and committed to apocalyptic resistance, continued fighting until Allied armies reached Berlin and reduced the Reich to occupied rubble. The captured Mustangs, those symbols of American power, remained in German hangars until advancing. Allied troops overran the testing facilities and recovered their own aircraft. The epilogue of power, the story of captured P-51 Mustangs in German hands, transcends simple narrative of superior technology defeating inferior opposition. These aircraft, flying in enemy skies under hostile markings, carried meanings that extended into philosophy, ideology, and national character. They represented American industrial democracy's answer to totalitarian militarism, proving that free societies, when threatened and mobilized, could match and exceed the war-making capacities of nations built entirely around military power. This lesson, taught at altitude over dying German cities, in captured aircraft flown by enemy pilots who recognized their own obsolescence, resonated through the remainder of the 20th century. The Mustang's dominance validated strategic choices American planners made years before Pearl Harbor, while Nazi Germany bet its future on tactical brilliance and quick victories. While Japan sought empire through audacious strikes and fanatical determination, America invested in industrial capacity, research infrastructure, and educational systems that produced engineers and pilots by the tens of thousands. These investments, seemingly wasteful during peacetime, proved decisive when war came. The nation could afford to spend years developing the perfect fighter, could afford to scrap inadequate designs and start over, could afford to build wind tunnels and research facilities and testing ranges that refined aircraft until they achieved excellence. Germany, lacking these resources and facing enemies on every border, could not match this patient, systematic development process. The captured Mustangs also embodied a more subtle truth about military effectiveness, that treating soldiers as valuable assets, rather than expendable tools, produces superior combat results. The Americans designed fighters with pilot survival and comfort as primary considerations. The Germans, contrite astray by resources and driven by ideological acceptance of sacrifice, built fighters that prioritize performance over pilot protection. The result, paradoxically, inverted expectations. American pilots, flying comfortable aircraft with excellent visibility, effective radios, and protective systems, maintained higher morale, better situational awareness, and superior survival rates. They accumulated experience through multiple combat tours, becoming more effective with each mission. German pilots, flying in cramped cockpits with limited visibility and minimal protection, died faster than they could be replaced, their tactical knowledge perishing with them. The Mustang's cushioned seat and clear canopy, seemingly trivial luxuries, contributed to American victory as significantly as its powerful engine and elegant wings. The philosophical implications cut deeper still. Nazi ideology rested on premises about racial superiority, the triumph of will over material conditions, the supremacy of warrior spirit over industrial capacity. The Mustang demolished these premises empirically. Here was a machine designed by engineers of diverse backgrounds, some German immigrants fleeing Nazi persecution, built by factory workers, including women and minorities, flown by pilots drawn from American democracy's broad population, and it dominated fighters built by the supposedly superior Aryan workforce, serving the totalitarian state. The meritocracy of free markets and open societies, given time to mobilize, had produced weapons that genetic determinism and authoritarian discipline could not match. This outcome suggested uncomfortable truths about the sources of innovation, creativity, and excellence that totalitarian regimes preferred not to acknowledge. The Mustang also represented something more fundamental about American character and capability, the capacity for systematic excellence at industrial scale. European powers, including Germany, had long dismissed American culture as materialistic and superficial, lacking the depth and sophistication of European civilization. The P-51 challenged this dismissal. The aircraft embodied not just wealth but thoughtful design, not just quantity but quality, not just resources but the refined application of scientific knowledge to practical problems. The laminar flow wing came from patient aerodynamic research. The Merlin engine reflected decades of development and manufacturing expertise. The aircraft's systems integration showed careful attention to pilot needs and operational requirements. This was not the work of crude industrialists throwing money at problems, but of sophisticated engineers applying advanced knowledge with meticulous care. The Mustang proved that American civilization, whatever its cultural could compete with and exceed European technical achievement when circumstances demanded. For the German pilots who flew captured Mustangs, the experience carried personal tragedy beyond their nation's defeat. These men had devoted years to mastering their profession, had survived when most of their comrades died, had believed their skill and courage mattered in war's calculus. The Mustang taught them that individual excellence, no matter how great, could not overcome systemic disadvantage. A competent pilot in a superior aircraft would defeat an ace in an inferior machine. This lesson, professionally devastating, forced survivors to reconsider everything they understood about aerial warfare and perhaps war itself. Skill mattered, courage mattered, but industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and strategic resources mattered more. The romantic notion of war as individual combat between champions, already strained by mechanized warfare's reality, collapsed entirely when confronting the Mustang's systematic superiority. The symbolism of that captured P-51D, sitting in its Munich hangar bearing German crosses over American stars, resonated through the post-war world. Allied occupation forces recovered the aircraft and returned it to American hands, where it was restored and eventually displayed in museums as a testament to American engineering triumph. But its brief service under enemy colors told a deeper story of a war, won not by desperation or fanaticism, but by patient preparation, industrial might, and the application of scientific knowledge to military necessity. The Germans had captured the Mustang, hoping to understand and perhaps counter its advantages. Instead, they had confirmed their own defeat in the most tangible way possible, by flying the instrument of their destruction and recognizing, from inside the cockpit, that they faced an opponent they could not overcome. The legacy of abundance lessons embedded in the Mustang's wartime service extended far beyond 1945, shaping military doctrine and strategic thinking for generations. The aircraft proved that control of airspace enabling ground and naval operations while denying the same two enemies required not just excellent aircraft but enough excellent aircraft to overwhelm opposition through sustained operations. The Germans had produced fighters with impressive performance characteristics throughout the war. The Messerschmitt Me 262 jet, introduced in 1944, exceeded the Mustang's speed by over 100 miles per hour and represented a generational leap in aviation technology. But Germany could not produce Me 262s in sufficient numbers, could not train pilots fast enough to replace losses, could not fuel and maintain the jets given collapsing logistics networks. The Americans, with thousands of Mustangs and robust logistics chains delivering fuel, ammunition, and spare parts wherever needed, maintained overwhelming force even against technically superior opponents. This lesson that sustainable superiority matters more than peak performance influenced American military procurement for decades. Rather than seeking the ultimate weapon that exceeded all others, American planners pursued good enough weapons producible in overwhelming quantities, supportable through extended campaigns, reliable under field conditions, and operable by personnel of average training. This philosophy, visible in everything from M16 rifles to F-16 fighters to M1 Abrams tanks, reflected lessons the Mustang taught. The perfect weapon that can't be produced, maintained, or supported becomes a liability. The excellent weapon that appears in decisive numbers wins wars. The Mustang's escort mission doctrine, once proven effective, became the template for modern fighter employment. The concept seems obvious in retrospect. Fighters should protect bombers by destroying enemy fighters attempting interception. But before the Mustang made long-range escort practical, fighters could not reach targets deep in enemy territory, and alternative doctrines like heavy bomber, self-defense, or night operations carried severe limitations. The P-51's range transformed tactical possibilities, enabling doctrines that subsequent generations of fighters inherited and refined. Modern strike packages, with fighters escorting bombers and suppressing enemy defenses, descend directly from tactics developed by Mustang. groups over Germany in 1944. The aircraft also validated the American approach to technology development, patient research, extensive testing, willingness to abandon failed designs and start over, and continuous refinement based on operational feedback. The Mustang itself went through multiple iterations before achieving its final, decisive form. Early versions with Allison engines performed adequately at low altitude but lacked high-altitude capability. Rather than accepting this limitation, American planners authorized the Merlin engine integration, transforming the aircraft into the war-winning fighter it became. This iterative development process, accepting initial failures as learning opportunities rather than disasters, reflected a cultural attitude toward innovation that totalitarian regimes struggled to match. German development programs, under constant pressure to produce immediate results and unable to tolerate failure in systems already in production, could not match the American systematic refinement approach for German survivors. The Mustang became a reference point in post-war discussions about why Germany lost. Memoirs and historical analyses by former Luftwaffe personnel consistently cite the P-51 as evidence of Allied material superiority that courage could not overcome. These accounts, stripped of wartime propaganda and written with decades of perspective, acknowledge what men like Fischer recognized in 1945, that Germany had fought a war it could not win against opponents whose resources and capabilities exceeded German capacity by orders of magnitude. The Mustang symbolized this disparity more effectively than any statistic about steel production or aircraft manufacturing, because German pilots had flown the aircraft themselves and experienced directly what it meant to face such superiority in combat. The sound of doom throughout the spring of 1945, as Allied armies closed on Berlin from all directions and the Third Reich entered its final agonized weeks, the sound that haunted German soldiers and civilians was not the thunder of artillery or the rumble of tanks, but the distinctive note of Merlin engines at altitude. The Mustang's power plant, with its supercharger and 12-cylinder configuration, produced a sound unlike any other fighter, part roar, part whistle, a rising note that carried for miles through cold air. German civilians learned to identify this sound without looking up, learned to recognize when American fighters circled overhead, looking for targets, learned to freeze in place and pray the pilots had not spotted them. This sound, heard daily across what remained of the Reich, became the auditory signature of German defeat, a constant reminder that the nation's airspace belonged to its enemies. Absolutely, Luftwaffe pilots, those who survived into war's final months, developed psychological responses to the Merlin's distinctive note that bordered on trauma. Hearing it meant Mustangs were near, which meant combat at severe disadvantage, which meant probable death. The sound triggered survival reaction scan for the fighters, assess altitude and numbers, plan escape routes, prepare for combat. But increasingly, especially after Germany's fuel situation became catastrophic in early 1945, German pilots on the ground simply listened to that sound and remained in their dispersal areas, unable to take off because they lacked fuel, unable to fight because they lacked aircraft, forced to sit helplessly while enemy fighters controlled the skies above their own airfields. This impotence, experienced daily by men trained as warriors, completed the psychological defeat the Mustang inflicted. The sound carried meanings beyond immediate military threat. It represented the failure of Nazi promises, the collapse of German technical superiority claims, the refutation of propaganda assurances that wonder weapons would reverse the war. When civilians heard Merlins overhead, they understood their government had lied about the war's progress, about Germany's capabilities, about the inevitable final victory that would never come. The sound became acoustic evidence of reality that no propaganda broadcast could suppress. American fighters flew over German cities in broad daylight, attacking at will, departing safely, returning the next day. No Luftwaffe response materialized. No wonder weapons appeared to drive them away. The disconnect between propaganda and reality, made audible in those Merlin engines, accelerated the civilian population's psychological collapse. For the German soldiers in the captured aircraft program, men like Fischer who had flown the Mustang and understood its capabilities intimately, the sound carried additional layers of meaning. They heard in those engines the sound of American industrial might, of research programs they could not match, of development processes they could not emulate, of pilot training pipelines that produced competent aviators faster than Germany could kill them. They heard their own obsolescence, the irrelevance of their skill and experience when facing systemic superiority. Most painfully, they heard evidence of their nation's catastrophic strategic miscalculations, the decision to wage war against opponents who possessed resources and capabilities German planners had fundamentally underestimated. The final flights captured P-51D that Fischer flew that January morning continued evaluation flights through February and into early March 1945, as the Reich's territory shrank daily under Soviet advances from the east and Anglo-American drives from the west. Each flight provided additional data, refined performance assessments, confirmed what was already devastatingly clear. The Americans had built a fighter Germany could not match and could not counter. The test program, originally intended to develop tactics that might reduce Mustang effectiveness, devolved into academic exercise. No tactics could overcome the performance gap. No innovations could compensate for the aircraft's comprehensive advantages. The flights continued because military bureaucracy, even in a dying regime, maintained its procedures and protocols. In mid-March, with Soviet forces approaching Rechlin and the evaluation program's continuation becoming impossible, orders came to destroy the captured aircraft rather than allow them to be recaptured. The Mustang, along with captured Spitfires, P-47 Thunderbolts, and other Allied types, was to be burned or demolished. Fischer, now evacuating with the test unit toward Bavaria, never learned whether the orders were carried out or whether advancing Soviet troops captured the aircraft intact. The uncertainty seemed appropriate by then. Such details had ceased to matter. Whether this particular Mustang survived or was destroyed changed nothing about the war's outcome or the lessons it had taught. Other captured Mustangs met various fates as Germany collapsed. Some were recaptured by Allied forces advancing through Luftwaffe facilities, restored to American markings, and returned to service. Others were destroyed by retreating German forces following scorched earth protocols. A few disappeared into the chaos of the war's final weeks. Their ultimate fate, unrecorded. Post-war investigators found remnants of several captured American fighters at abandoned German facilities, the aircraft stripped for parts or cannibalized to keep other machines flying a few additional hours. These fragmentary remains, scattered across occupied Germany, testified to the captured aircraft program's ultimate futility. German desperation had sought answers in enemy technology, but the aircraft themselves provided only confirmation of defeat. The pilots who flew these captured fighters dispersed into post-war obscurity. Fischer survived the war, surrendered to American forces in early May, and spent 2 years in prisoner of war camps before release and repatriation. His detailed knowledge of captured Allied aircraft made him valuable to post-war intelligence services, and he spent weeks in debriefing sessions describing his experiences with the Mustang and other types. American interrogators found his assessments consistent with their own understanding of their aircraft's capabilities. The Germans had recognized the Mustang's superiority clearly and completely. They simply lacked means to counter it. Fischer's post-war career remains largely unknown, as does his ultimate fate. One former warrior among millions, returning to the difficult task of rebuilding shattered lives in a defeated nation. Reflections on freedom and power. The captured P-51 Mustangs, those symbols of American might flying temporarily under German crosses, ultimately represented ideas more than hardware. They embodied the proposition that free societies, when mobilized for existential conflict, can match and exceed totalitarian states in the very domains industrial production, technological innovation, martial effectiveness where authoritarians claim inherent superiority. This proposition, tested in the crucible of total war, proved true. The democracy that Nazi ideology dismissed as weak and decadent had produced weapons that systematically destroyed the most heavily militarized nation in Europe. The free market capitalism that communism condemned as inefficient had organized industrial production on scales command economies could not approach. The open society that fascism rejected as chaotic had coordinated military, industrial, and scientific efforts with a precision centralized dictatorships failed to achieve. These lessons resonated through subsequent decades of Cold War competition, providing assurance to Western democracies facing Soviet totalitarianism. The Mustang's success against Nazi fighters suggested that free societies possessed advantages in sustained conflicts that went beyond moral superiority to practical effectiveness. democratic governments, accountable to populations and operating through distributed decision-making, proved better at allocating resources, encouraging innovation, and maintaining morale through extended struggles than dictatorships that relied on coercion and propaganda. The prosperity that free markets generated provided resources for military strength. The freedoms that open societies protected, attracted talent, and encouraged creativity. These advantages, validated by the Mustang's wartime dominance, shaped strategic confidence throughout the Cold War era. The aircraft also symbolized a specifically American approach to warfare, the application of overwhelming resources and industrial capacity to achieve decisive victory rather than accepting prolonged struggle. European powers, constrained by limited resources and fighting in their own territories, had developed military traditions emphasizing efficiency, tactical brilliance, and careful husbanding of scarce assets. America, blessed with continental resources and protected by oceans, could afford a different approach: build enough of the best equipment, train enough competent personnel, establish robust logistics, and overwhelm opponents through sustained superiority. The Mustang exemplified this philosophy: not the lightest fighter, not the fastest, not the most maneuverable, not the most heavily armed, but overall the most effective, because it excelled adequately in all important parameters, while being producible in decisive quantities and supportable through extended campaigns. This American way of war, validated in World War II and refined through subsequent conflicts, rested on assumptions about national capacity that the Mustang proved accurate. America could afford to spend years developing the perfect fighter because its homeland remained untouched by enemy action. Its factories operated without disruption. Its research facilities pursued pure science that sometimes led nowhere, but occasionally produced revolutionary breakthroughs. This strategic depth, this ability to absorb setbacks and persist in development programs until achieving success, represented a form of power that exceeded mere military strength. It was the power of patient confidence, of resources so vast that failure could be tolerated as a step toward eventual success, of industrial capacity so great that excellence could be pursued, without desperate shortcuts or compromises. The inheritance modern fighter aircraft, sophisticated beyond anything 1940s engineers imagined, nonetheless inherit DNA from the P-51 Mustang. The emphasis on range and endurance, the integration of pilot comfort with performance, the focus on reliability and maintainability, the willingness to refine designs through multiple iterations until achieving excellence. These Mustang characteristics appear in contemporary fighters from the F-15 to the F-35. The doctrines these modern aircraft execute descend directly from tactics Mustang pilots developed over Germany. The industrial philosophy that produces them reflects lessons learned building P-51s by the thousands while maintaining quality control and continuous improvement. The Mustang's influence extends beyond military hardware into broader cultural territory. The aircraft became a symbol of American power and confidence, appearing in films, books, and historical commemorations as the fighter that won the air war. Airshow audiences still thrill to the sound of Merlin engines, as restored Mustangs demonstrate the grace and power that destroyed the Luftwaffe. These flying museums, maintained by enthusiasts who recognize the aircraft's historical significance, keep alive not just machines but memories of what American industrial democracy achieved when challenged by existential threat. Each flight, each display, each restored Mustang represents a story about capability and purpose that subsequent generations inherit and, hopefully, remember. For historians examining World War II's causes, conduct, and outcome, the Mustang provides a lens through which to understand how material factors shape military results. No amount of tactical brilliance, fighting spirit, or ideological fervor could overcome the systematic advantages American industrial capacity provided its military forces. This lesson, sometimes uncomfortable for those who prefer narratives emphasizing human agency over material conditions, nonetheless remains crucial for understanding both why Germany lost and why America won. Wars between industrial powers, the Mustang proved, are won in factories and research laboratories as much as battlefields, perhaps more so. The nation that can field superior equipment in decisive quantities, supported by robust logistics and flown by adequately trained personnel, defeats the nation relying on tactical genius and individual heroism to compensate for material inferiority. The German pilots who flew captured Mustangs recognized these truths from inside the cockpit, feeling through their hands on the controls the difference between their nation's declining capabilities and America's rising power. Their reports, technical and restrained, concealed profound implications about the war they fought and the society they served. They had flown the best fighter America could build, and it had proved superior to anything Germany could produce. This recognition, multiplied across thousands of engagements and millions of rounds fired, shaped the air war's outcome as decisively as any battle or campaign. The Mustang was not invincible. Hundreds were shot down by ground fire, mechanical failure, and occasionally by skilled German pilots exploiting momentary advantages. But the term German test pilots used, impossible to bring down, captured a deeper truth, that in the aggregate, across thousands of sorties and millions of flight hours, the P-51 dominated its operational environment so completely that German resistance became futile. The monument in flight today, 75 restored P-51 Mustangs, remain airworthy, maintained by museums and private collectors who preserve these artifacts of industrial warfare. Each flight of these vintage aircraft, their Merlin engines singing the same distinctive note that haunted German skies 8 decades ago, serves as flying monument to American achievement in history's largest conflict. Spectators watching these aircraft perform at air shows, even those ignorant of specific history, sense something significant in the Mustang's graceful lines and purposeful presence. The aircraft looks like what it is: a weapon designed for decisive victory, built by a nation mobilizing its full industrial might, flown by pilots confident in their equipment and their cause. The Mustang's story, from captured example to systematic destroyer of German air power, encapsulates broader truths about warfare, technology, and national capacity that transcend its specific historical moment. It demonstrates that wars between modern industrial states are won not by superior will or ideology, but by superior resources properly applied. It proves that democratic societies, despite their apparent inefficiencies and contentious politics, can organize for collective purpose with devastating effectiveness when confronted by existential threats. It validates the proposition that investing in research, development, and education produces strategic advantages that directly translate to military success. These lessons, taught by an aircraft that German pilots flew and recognized as superior to their own fighters, remain relevant as long as nations compete through military means. The captured Mustang in that Munich hangar, flown by Hauptmann Wolfgang Fischer on a frozen January morning, represented the last moment before acceptance of inevitable defeat. German pilots who flew that aircraft experienced briefly what American aviators felt daily: absolute confidence in their equipment, certainty that their aircraft gave them every advantage technology could provide, knowledge that if they died in combat it would not be because their nation sent them to fight with inferior weapons. For the Germans, this experience lasted only as long as their evaluation flights, ending when they climbed from the cockpit and returned to their own obsolescent fighters. For the Americans, it lasted through war's conclusion and into the peace that followed. That peculiarly American peace built on demonstrated capacity to produce overwhelming force when challenged. The P-51 Mustang, in German hands and under enemy markings, told truths that propaganda could not suppress and ideology could not refute. It spoke in the language of performance, data, and combat results, saying simply, you are facing an opponent whose resources exceed your own, whose technology matches or surpasses yours, whose capacity for sustained effort will eventually crush resistance, regardless of courage or skill. This message, delivered from the cockpit of an enemy fighter performing maneuvers German aircraft could not match, completed the Luftwaffe's psychological defeat months before the Reich's military collapse. The pilots who flew those captured Mustangs knew Germany had lost the air war, absolutely. They knew why, and they knew no force of will or tactical brilliance could change the outcome. In that knowledge, gained at altitude in an enemy fighter that flew better than anything their own factories could build, lay the final, irrefutable proof that the war had been lost before it was truly begun, lost in the factories and research centers and training schools where American democracy prepared for conflict while Nazi Germany celebrated early victories that would prove hollow and temporary. The Mustang flies still, a testament to what free people can achieve when their civilization faces mortal threat, a reminder that abundance and democracy, properly mobilized, produce power that authoritarianism cannot match, a symbol of industrial might placed in service of liberation rather than conquest. Those German pilots who flew captured examples are gone now, their experiences fading into history, but their lesson endures in the distinctive sound of Merlin engines and the graceful lines of the aircraft they recognized, too late to matter, as impossible to bring down.